Congressman, I'd like to pivot for a second. We've had a busy couple of weeks in our nation's capital, a lot happening with the Supreme Court. A lot of pundits out there are saying that many Republicans are on the wrong side of history with some of these issues. I want to first talk about Obamacare. The Supreme Court ruling last week that Obamacare is here to stay. Some Republicans still in the Stone Age when it comes to this issue. Where do you stand on Obamacare?
Well, and I'm not a fan of Obamacare in its entirety. There are certain parts of it that have benefited people, my constituents, in the whole nation.
Right.
I mean, there are people who have benefited, but overall, in the district, and if you look at the numbers, how more people on Obamacare getting away when they've lost their private insurance, it's affected our hospitals. It's an effect that most people aren't seeing, but it is affecting them because my hospitals are coming to me and saying, hey, we're struggling because we're waiting on so many, we have so many more people being reimbursed federally.
Would you agree that every citizen has a right to, a fundamental right to a decent quality of health care as a right and not a privilege, and that the rich shouldn't have sole access to it, that everybody should have access to it?
Well, and yes, I think everybody has a right to health care. I think everybody has the right to be able to get health care. But you can't, the way this law was passed, the way it raised costs on certain people, the taxes, it had a real impact on innovation, had a real impact on a lot of different parts of health care that most people don't see.
Right.
But it is something that there were a few good things in there that helped folks making sure that they did get insurance. People, it would have been because of a pre-existing condition, probably wouldn't have got insurance. There are things there that are helpful, but we need to get the bad parts fixed.
Some of the negatives that I heard, I showed you some comments before we sat down here. Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, Mike Huckabee, all running for the presidency in 2016. The Republicans trying to retake the White House. You would think that some of these candidates wouldn't be so outspoken. We have limited time, so I do want to cover same-sex marriage briefly. The Supreme Court ruling 5-4 that same-sex couples can marry across all 50 states. I think it's interesting that so many Republicans are so outspoken about this. Now, you have not always been in lockstep in key with your party, which I think is a positive. But Mike Huckabee saying some really, I would say, controversial things over the weekend about how this needs to stop and people have religious rights. Conservative Justice Anthony Kennedy was one of the champions of this. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan. What's going on with Republicans and this gay marriage issue?
You know, and it is a tough one because everybody has their personal beliefs, and we have a right to those personal beliefs. But it is something that the court has made their decision, and they made it based on the merits of the country that we live in and the freedoms that people fought for. And sometimes we don't always agree with those freedoms. But I think when people focus back on the Bible and their personal beliefs, they have to remember the most important part is to love your neighbor and respect one another.
And separate church and state. You know, I think it's interesting in doing some research. I read that politicians, both Democratic and Republican, a century ago didn't want to give women the right to vote because they said women had smaller brains. And we see how that all turned out. So there is sort of a side of history that you want to be on with these things. I'm not saying which side is the right side or the wrong side, but it's just interesting to see all this happen. Finally, there are 12 candidates. Some say 13 and 14 and 15 will come into the Republican field. Do you have any favorites for 2016? You
know, I do, but we haven't released anything publicly. We've been talking to some. We've reached out to some. I've gotten to know some while in the legislature, getting to know. I've met with Rubio quite a few times. I've played baseball with Rand Paul for a while. I've run across Cruz in D.C. quite a few times. But even some of the governors. I personally like governors. I think that approach, the executive experience, is something very important. Nothing against our senators that we've got running, but I think the president is a prime example of...
So not ready to commit just yet?
Well, we're leaning in one direction.
You've got to make that announcement on Fox here on Eyewitness News. Final question, 10 seconds. In 2012, an obscure congressman from Wisconsin was the vice presidential nominee with Mitt Romney, coming from a state with 4 electoral votes. We've got a congressman who happens to be our House Majority Leader from a state with over 50 electoral votes. Yes or no, is Kevin McCarthy on a ballot in 2016?
Oh, he'll be on a ballot in 2016.
No, you know what I mean. A presidential ballot in 2016, yes or no?
I don't believe it. I don't believe he'd want to. I mean, he's doing a really good job in the House.
So we'll take that as a no.
But I can't speak for him.
Okay. All right. Good answer, Congressman David Valadao. You will be on our drought special tonight. Your voice, your future. It airs over on KBAK at 5:30. That is Congressman David Valadao. We appreciate you being with us. 8:30 is the time. Coming up next here on Fox, we'll have